Joshua Alton Sipper, and this is my talk, my keynote presentation for the IARIA Conference 2021, Cyber 2021 Conference on Information Warfare and Critical Infrastructure, the combined power of information warfare threats. So I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen, and we can get this underway. I'm very happy to be back at IARIA this year, uh, doing a keynote and also a panel and presenting some information about this important topic. Um, and before I get started talking about information warfare and critical infrastructure, I'll just give a little bit of background on myself. Um, this is my official bio, but and you're welcome to read it, but I'll go ahead and just kind of give you a rundown the way I usually do, starting from where I am now, which is I've been at the Air Force Cyber College for the last 2 years as a professor of cyber warfare studies. Before that, I was actually at the LeMay Center for Doctrine and Education, um, and there I was in a cyber billet. So I performed many cyber duties there. I was there for about 99 years. I built a web application for the Doctrine uh, Development Directorate, and also was a SharePoint administrator and website administrator for 3 different websites. So I was able to have a lot of fun doing that, as well as other things. Before that, I was at the 26th Network Operations Squadron for about 6 years, and there I was the chief of standardization and evaluation, or StanEval, for cyber crew. So I was cyber crew certified. Um, helped write all the training and evaluations and deliver the evaluations. I was also cyber exercise manager while I was there, so I was able to travel the world and go to a lot of cyber exercises and participate in those, which was a lot of fun and very rewarding. Had a lot of lessons learned from those as well. Before that, before my time with General Dynamics, I worked for Lockheed Martin for a couple of years. Um, I was mostly doing intelligence, U2 type intelligence gathering and reporting. I was an elite mission supervisor during that time, and then prior to that, I was in the Air Force doing basically the same thing. So have a deep intelligence, electromagnetic warfare, and cyber background over the last several years. And you can see some of my educational experience there from uh, during my PhD just a few years ago, back in 2012, and my MED in education from Troy, and my bachelor's in English from Faulkner University. So let's go ahead and get started. I just want to go through a little bit of what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to do a brief introduction. I talk about information warfare threats to critical infrastructure specifically. Then I'll get into cyber operations and critical infrastructure threats, electromagnetic warfare, critical infrastructure threats, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, critical infrastructure threats, and information operations, critical infrastructure threats. Then I'll talk about the vulnerabilities, critical infrastructure, and then finally some information warfare adversaries. And you'll know the big four, but we'll talk about those toward the end, and then I'll wrap up with a conclusion. So let's go ahead and get started with the introduction. Over the last decade, the pressure exerted by peer adversaries such as China and Russia on critical infrastructure across the globe has increased markedly. The growth of ransomware attacks, malware, disinformation, electromagnetic warfare, espionage, and a host of other aggressive actions and strategies has heightened the need to look more deeply into how to protect critical infrastructure, not only from cyber threats, but also from information warfare and hybrid warfare threats. Vulnerabilities within the information environment, or IE, associated with critical infrastructure abound, with cyber physical systems at the fore of concern. As attacks have occurred, resilience and systems hardening have been instituted to protect these vulnerable entry points. However, other attack surfaces and vectors have not been adequately scrutinized. The GPS and communication systems used for harbor, port, and other maritime infrastructure fall within the electromagnetic spectrum, for instance, as do many aspects of roadway, rail shipping, and air carriers, not to mention emergency services and law uh, law enforcement. Intelligence gathered during recent supply chain attacks, such as the well-known SolarWinds espionage exfiltration, can provide information regarding individuals, systems, and vulnerabilities within various CI or critical infrastructure enclaves. Information operations or IO through social media, psychological and effective means, and other influence operations can erode public trust in critical infrastructure operators and providers, destabilizing industries, governments, and economies. The above examples are just a few of the myriad attacks that have been and can be perpetrated by U.S. and allied peer, or China and Russia, and near peer, North Korea and Iran, adversaries bent on destabilization, theft of intellectual property and assets, and generally exerting their own influence and power in any way possible. These are not new concerns, as Russia has been enacting information warfare in various forms since the early 20th century, with significant technological advances supporting and furthering its increasingly aggressive behavior toward neighboring former Soviet Union countries in the late 2000s and continuing unabated to present day. However, the fact that these and other actions from the likes of Russia and China, as well as other emerging threats, have gone unchallenged is of great concern and continues, as well as other emerging threats have gone to and continues to grow. Additionally, the continued experimentation with information warfare, information related capabilities, or IRCs, such as electromagnetic warfare, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or ISR, and information operations is a harbinger of more pronounced and distributed power projection against the U.S. and other geographically separated allies. In an effort to more fully grasp the significance of the threats posed by information warfare against critical infrastructure, the information warfare IRCs will be examined and related to threat vectors. Vulnerabilities within these critical infrastructure systems will also be laid bare in order to see how each threat poses a risk to critical infrastructure. And finally, adversarial strategies and operations will be discussed in order to understand the asymmetric advantages associated with each and how they might be combated. So let's talk a little bit about information warfare threats to critical infrastructure. Before one can understand the information warfare IRCs individually, it's important to create a cognitive map of how these information or operational areas work and interact with each other. For instance, one might point to the Israeli bombing operation against the Syrian nuclear program coined Operation Orchard. This complex undertaking was carried out through the use of all four IRCs. So that would be cyber operations, ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, EW or electromagnetic warfare, and IO or information operations, and provides a clear example of how a peer adversary might undertake a potentially damaging operation. The Syrian nuclear facility was being built under supervision and support from North Korean nuclear scientists and engineers. Israeli intelligence, the first IRC in play, gathered location, integrated air defense system, and cyber systems intelligence, and subsequently used this information to get inside the Syrian IADs. Once inside, the cyber operators, which is the second IRC, used code to provide radar spoofing within the electromagnetic spectrum, the third IRC, which caused the IADs to give faulty information regarding the location, heading, and other information about incoming Israeli aircraft. When the aircraft flew over, they were completely unchallenged and able to completely destroy the facility, thus leaving the psychological information influence, the fourth IRC, with Syria that other adversaries that Israel could carry and Syria and other adversaries that Israel could carry out military operations and precision and impunity. Although Israel is a U.S. ally, this is a salient example of other operations carried out by U.S. and allied adversaries against other nation states. One only need to look at Russia's actions in Ukraine and other FSU sovereign nations to find corollaries. These manipulations do not only rest in military operations, however. Other considerations related to critical infrastructure, including industrial control systems, or ICS, and supervisory control and data acquisitions, or SCADA, networks, are also at risk in numerous ways. The potential impetus of economic instruments of power, for instance, could motivate an adversary to target cyber physical systems in order to gather intelligence about those systems or target them for intrusion. Adversaries also seek out asymmetric methods through hybrid warfare and information warfare, using less expensive and more creative means to overwhelm, penetrate, infiltrate, and exfiltrate critical infrastructure systems. By employing soft actions through an holistic strategy that includes encouraging this destabilization of the economy, frustration and disaffection of the population, splintering of minorities or aggrieved populations, creation of conditions encouraging controlled or uncontrolled migration, suppression of civil resistance, and disruption of critical infrastructure. Numerous operational IRCs can be combined for maximum effect. Other nations, including Iran, Saudi Arabia, China, Israel, and Venezuela, have begun to join the fray in the information environment as well, adding to the complexity of an already congested and contested space. In the electromagnetic spectrum, existing and emergent concerns, including jamming and spoofing of communications, radar, data link systems, and GPS, have arisen, leading to potential scenarios where rail, port, maritime, and other shipping operations could break down and be rendered completely paralyzed. The recent halting of the Suez Canal by the mega container vessel Ever Given has increased these fears and pointed to the potential chaos associated with the numerous position navigation and timing, or PNT, communications data link, and other systems integral to navigation. Likewise, there have been many raised concerns about how devices, whether single powerful devices like the multiple devices used systematically, could cause a serious shipping accident in areas like the English Channel, the world's busiest seaway. Information warfare and hybrid warfare have been an integral part of China's strategy for decades. As early as 1986, China made part of its warfare policy the use of asymmetric hybrid warfare, or AHW, rooted in unrestricted warfare, blending conventional warfare, asymmetric warfare, irregular warfare, offset warfare, nonlinear warfare, and cyber warfare against its adversaries for the purpose of destroying the West. This strategy has continued until present day and shows no sign of ceasing, leading to further fears regarding critical infrastructure and information warfare threats China and other adversaries can undoubtedly commit. The four IRCs associated with information warfare are pivotal to comprehending the threats of critical infrastructure to threats to critical infrastructure. Cyber operations, of course, has been the primary area of concern for CI for several years, and rightly so. As cyber capabilities and the associated critical infrastructure attack surface has proliferated, ingress routes to critical infrastructure and cyber physical systems have only increased. Although much of CI mechanical assets are air gapped, allowing for increased buffering against cyber attack, the associated financial, human resource, educational, electromagnetic communications, radar, and GPS systems, as well as social media presence, marketing, and other reputation based IRCs, are virtually left completely unsecured. These threats will be discussed individually to better relate how each operates, and short vignettes characterized in Figure 1, which we'll see in a moment, will be used to amplify their operational impact. So now we'll move on. This is the Figure 1 that I was just referring to, but we'll talk a little bit now about cyber operations specifically and critical infrastructure threats. And I'll refer to this figure as we go through talking about the other information-related capabilities as well. So the first information-related capability we talk about here is cyber operations. In order to set a baseline and associations for discussions of other IRCs, it's first necessary to see how cyber operations works to enable the operations of these capabilities. Each of the blue ovals in Figure 1 is the encompassing cyber information and communications technology, people, infrastructure, and planning necessary for the information warfare's function to actually work individually and collaboratively. It is therefore crucial for cyber as the key enabler to be present in each of these and other information warfare activities. This was nowhere clearer than during the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, where everything from hospitals to the World Health Organization experienced cyber attacks and ransomware against a wide range of critical infrastructure, including health, food, fuel, and information systems. The threats originated with actors such as China with the Hafnium hack and Russia, the SolarWinds hack, and have continued in a downward spiral with nearly continuous ransomware, malware, and other malicious cyber criminal activity allowed by host countries. Further threats exist in relation to cyber physical systems and will continue to push attack vectors into any enclave possible. Cyber-physical systems are said to be rapidly penetrating and will eventually permeate all critical infrastructure verticals of every country, leading to an exponentially increased footprint, enticing to various threat actors from every echelon. As the industrial Internet of Things, or IIoT, continues to expand, interconnected systems and organizations will widen the already large boundaries of critical infrastructure. With this added complexity, including the interconnections between critical infrastructure industries and supply chains, the propensity for threats to increase activity and create more attack tools and methods will likely increase precipitously. Cyber operations threats are wide and varied. However, as the following sections will lay out, cyber operations is far from the only or even the most damaging of the information related capabilities. So now we'll discuss a bit about electromagnetic warfare critical infrastructure threats. EW, or electromagnetic warfare threats, have increased dramatically over the last 2 decades, with peer adversaries Russia and China moving into the lead with advanced radar, jamming, spoofing, and associated electromagnetic spectrum technologies. This fact, accompanied by the recent move to 5G technologies, has increased not only the EMS attack surface or structure, but also the types of aggressive EW possible, or electromagnetic warfare possible, within the EMS and the information environment. The use of mobile ad hoc networks, or MANEs, as noted in Figure 1, the top right oval, has increased the threat potential by making the electromagnetic warfare threat mobile, versatile, and resilient. With the onset and establishment of broadband service within critical infrastructure, the use of wireless signals to transmit data, albeit encrypted, has already begun to increase as this is a lower cost solution to wired infrastructure with virtually no loss of throughput and minimal latency. From smart cities to artificial intelligence, telemedicine to driverless cars, virtual reality to the Internet of Things, Industry 4.0 to all manner of applications that will comprise this new ecosystem, 5G ushers in enormous opportunities. However, there are challenges extant in the advancement of 5G, including allocation of the EMS and peer competition from China, specifically, who is already leading the way in 5G infrastructure internationally. Consider the fact that and China has and continues to place 5G infrastructure in Africa and the Middle East, where the U.S. maintains a diplomatic, informational, military, and economic presence. While this might not be an opening to a direct critical infrastructure threat from a U.S. perspective, it certainly presents a first order effect for the countries dependent on this infrastructure, thereby presenting second and third order effects for the U.S. and its allies. This, however, is not the only threat, as China has inside information regarding the EMS side of how 5G and broadband signal propagation works, thereby allowing them a head start as it relates to the jamming, spoofing, and misdirection of these signals, thereby potentially enabling them to deny, degrade, disrupt, subvert, and potentially destroy critical infrastructure, communications data link, and radar capabilities. This capability brings with it the potential to cause chaos and disaster within many segments of critical infrastructure and among critical infrastructure firms and supply chain providers. Another more potent threat to critical infrastructure is the ever-present specter of electromagnetic pulse, or EMP. The use of an EMP has long been regarded as literally the nuclear option for the degradation and destruction of critical infrastructure. While EMP focuses mostly on the electrical grid, the cascading effects of such a weapon could cause disruptions and loss of human life at a massive scale. The lack of power would lead to degradation in other critical infrastructures necessary to sustain modern life, such as the supply of distribution of food, water, fuel, communications, finances, and emergency services. While an EMP of this destructive capacity can currently only be carried out by a high altitude nuclear explosion or mass coronal ejection, other EMP weapons are in development that could operate on a smaller scale, thus disrupting critical infrastructure, politically causing cascading effects at the local or regional scale. However, those effects might continue to spread to a national or even global level if not checked early. So now we'll move into intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or ISR, critical infrastructure threats. Adversary espionage operations are of paramount concern in relation to critical infrastructure infiltration and exfiltration. Before anyone can enact any sort, be they cyber operations, electromagnetic warfare, or information operations, they must first understand the full scope of the architecture, personnel, security, and other pivot points of critical infrastructure laydown. The recent SolarWinds supply chain espionage event is a prime instance of how adversaries, in this case Russian actors, can use intelligence gathering to break into numerous systems at the government and private level simultaneously. But not only was this an intelligence win for the hackers as they were able to use intelligence they had already gathered to infiltrate, it was an intelligence treasure trove on the exfiltration end as well. ISR supports and extends the power of the other IWIRCs by providing exquisite information regarding how to best carry out operations while also making clear to the ones being attacked that they are under persistent surveillance and reconnaissance. The psychological ramifications are significant, as is the propensity for magnified attack damage and loss of data. This fact makes cyber threat intelligence all the more important, as information regarding adversary ISR operations is vital to protect against espionage. The cybersecurity community's incomplete understanding of the entire series of actions required to execute malicious actions in cyberspace, together with the natural tendency of very adept system administrators and network defenders to focus on technically oriented activity directly observable on the network, have led to a one dimensional understanding of network defense and cyber intelligence. Under these circumstances, it's important to point out that a multidimensional approach is necessary for understanding cyber threats, with cyber threat intelligence being in the lead. For the critical infrastructure community, newer agencies such as DHS and CISA have been working toward establishing ways to combat adversary cyber intelligence gathering and operations. Part of this includes partnering with numerous entities, including new non traditional partners such as private sector, state, territorial, local, and tribal respondents. Through a multispectral alliance, more information can be gathered, shared, analyzed, and acted upon. All source intelligence is another area where adversaries can gather deeper and richer information for information warfare and critical infrastructure. The more information from multiple sources gathered, the greater the chance of breaking in and stealing data or implanting malware. On the converse, DHS and its Intelligence and Analysis, or INA Directorate, gather similar information on threats from a cyber perspective to attempt to prevent espionage and cyber attacks. What does not appear to be happening across agencies, critical infrastructure, and private companies is a full understanding of the information war threats to critical infrastructure through intelligence gathering. Adversaries who understand infrastructure weakness in the EMS and information environment, as well as in cyberspace and intelligence, can and will gather this information and exploit weaknesses at many levels to achieve multiple aims concurrently. Figure 1 gives some examples on how intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance can be used in concert with other information-related capabilities in this way. So now let's move on to the final IRC and the threats associated with it. So while information operations is generally characterized as a way to psychologically affect individuals, groups, and even nation states, it's much more than that and has direct implications that are related to critical infrastructure. Influence is a large part of information operations, or IO, as well, and reaches deep into decision spaces, potentially causing those affected to make poor decisions, slow decisions, and choices that could lead to denial, disruption, disclosure, and destruction of critical infrastructure assets and systems. However, the decision cycles of critical infrastructure strategists, operators, and technicians are not the only mind spaces in play. Government, private, and societal decision makers are often affected as well in many adverse ways. It is the technological interconnection via public telecommunications systems and associated dependency relationships and diffusion of information systems throughout the critical infrastructures more broadly, which requires a national approach to critical infrastructure protection that takes into consideration the global perspective. This global perspective can be applied directly to public trust, satisfaction, and stability as integral parts of perceptions about the attitudes toward critical infrastructure and the protections it lacks. If citizens at the local, state, national, or global level feel unsafe or insecure about the infrastructures that provide them water, electricity, food, and multiple other conveniences, services, and necessities, disintegration at multiple societal, governmental, and corporate levels is soon to follow. Information operations against critical infrastructure can also lead to shape, can also be used to shape perceptions, affect command and control capabilities, and test the steel of the tactical workforce through influencing decision making, and perceptions of individual and group usefulness and morale. All of these issues are wrapped up in the complexity of critical infrastructure organizations and structures. It is important to recognize just how multivalent critical infrastructure is with information and the information systems and processes that are used to create, store, process, and communicate information that is important to the mission of the organization, together with the policies, practices, procedures, laws, and other elements comprising the operational environment. At any point in this convoluted amalgamation of laws, policies, processes, and operations, an adversary can threaten the continued operations, decision making, and reputation of critical infrastructure organizations and the organizations associated with them. So now let's go to, um, we'll talk a bit about the critical infrastructure vulnerabilities, and then we'll go back and talk about the adversaries. Information warfare vulnerabilities within critical infrastructure are the complementarian partner of information warfare threats, with a vast number of them being directly exploitable by adversaries at many different levels. In the risk equation, threat plus vulnerability equals risk. Vulnerabilities inhabit the part of risk that critical infrastructure organizations can actually directly affect. It is important to remember that just as with information warfare threats, information warfare vulnerabilities are very complex and include vulnerabilities in the information environment, electromagnetic spectrum, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, as well as cyber operations. In discussing critical infrastructure vulnerabilities, it is useful to understand that the U.S. critical infrastructure as a whole consists of physical assets, information systems, and people, while individual sectors include power plants, railroads, hospitals, pipelines, and government facilities. In addition, each sector is dependent on the other. Dams provide water for hydroelectric plants, whereas emergency services require transportation and paved roads. Thus, within each of these infrastructure types, multiple information warfare vulnerabilities may exist and must be considered as they can create fertile ground for adversary attacks. The attack surface is large and virtually impossible to secure at every point. However, understanding information warfare vulnerabilities across the board is at least a step toward beginning to secure the most dangerous gaps. For instance, many critical information communications, radars, and navigation systems operating within the electromagnetic spectrum are directly vulnerable to jamming and spoofing. Jamming can be caused. Jamming can cause electromagnetic signals to not transmit to their source, causing inoperation of equipment and potentially catastrophic damage. Many cranes at seaports are operated wirelessly and easily jammed, as are rail systems, trucking radios, and numerous other EMS dependent systems. If these signals are disrupted, serious damage to life, limb, and resources can occur through train derailment, inaccurate navigation of sea vessels causing collisions, cranes releasing loads over the wrong area, and many other cataclysms. Spoofing is the other area of concern and is a significant vulnerability within the EMS. Spoofing feeds incorrect information into a system and can mislead operators and technicians to make incorrect and significantly damaging decisions. This is further exacerbated by the fact that industrial control system networks link or industrial control systems networks link devices that are designed to trust the communications running between them, which can ultimately cause horrific damage to components within the system, costing large amounts of money and resources. With numerous infrastructures and resident data, including the internet, telecommunications networks, computer systems, and embedded processors and controllers at risk, these vulnerabilities associated with the internal trust will continue to be at maximum risk. Vulnerabilities within a larger information environment is a risk multiplier as well, since critical infrastructure associated with systems are not secured, allowing multiple openings. The most recent critical infrastructure attack on the Colonial Pipeline is an example of these secondary systems being vulnerable to infiltration. The first step to exploiting these types of vulnerabilities is in knowing about them in the first place. This is where well conceived ISR and IO make all the difference. Through manipulation, influence, and espionage, information can be gleaned, making it possible for adversaries to understand the vulnerabilities and potentially use social engineering information operations to gain access and cause denial and disruption within financial, communication, and other peripheral systems critical to critical infrastructure operations. Again, cyber operations are the critical enabler for these information related capability exploitations and will likely continue to be the pivot point for adversary exploitation of vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure through information warfare. So now let's talk a bit about information warfare adversaries to critical infrastructure. The most recognizable information warfare adversaries to U.S. and allied countries and their critical infrastructure are China and Russia. With extremely sophisticated capabilities in information warfare, these nations are well positioned to insert themselves into the critical infrastructure systems of almost any sovereign nation they wish. While these nations have their own integrated capabilities, however, it is often a criminal element not formally sponsored by the governments that commits the acts. While the absence of state sponsorship complicates attribution, it nevertheless points to the fact that these governments, while not formally supportive, tacitly allow the actions to persist. As already noted, China and Russia have both advanced information warfare capabilities, especially in the areas of electromagnetic warfare and cyber operations, with pinnacle advantages in ISR and IO. China is recognized as being very adept in using electromagnetic warfare, especially jamming, as a far reaching information warfare capability. Through electromagnetic warfare attacks, the critical infrastructure, communications, shipping, radar, navigation, GPS, and numerous other capabilities are held at major risk, ostensibly preventing international global operations, not to mention local and interstate travel and operations. China and Russia both have well known and well developed capabilities, the potency of which have been demonstrated in space, cyberspace, the EMS, and the information environment. Space has been and will continue to be a highly critical domain for critical infrastructure as communications, navigation, and multiple other capabilities crucial to critical infrastructure operation within cyberspace and the information environment specifically can be disrupted through jamming GPS signals, numerous frequencies, including 5G, and a host of other signals in the EMS. The European Commission recognizes the importance of 5G specifically to its sovereignty in relation to Chinese threats against critical infrastructure. On 26 March 2019, the Commission published a recommendation on the cybersecurity of 5G networks. Such networks will be vital for the maintenance and operation of energy, transport, banking, health, industrial, and democratic infrastructure. The Commission called for European sovereignty in 5G networks, and it is made clear that China poses a risk in this regard because of Beijing's growing technological presence in the EU and its foreign investments in strategic sectors and critical infrastructure. Russia also prevents numerous risks to critical infrastructure in various ways. Through information operations, specifically disinformation, Russia continues its strategy of desinformatia or disinformation in order to destabilize the US and other Western nations. This strategy is part of what Russian strategists refer to as nonlinear warfare, where it is difficult to track how the adversary thinks and pinpoint attack vectors. This is one of the reasons Russia and its criminal patriot organizations prefer to use cyber operations and other information warfare tools against critical infrastructure. These IRCs all have unexpected and irregular functions and capabilities. Russia has shown itself to be a major influencer and information warfare threat through operations within the former Soviet Union states, especially Ukraine. Complex operations using EW, ISR, CO, and IO against Ukraine and its citizens, as well as other European nations, have allowed Russia to test these capabilities to their fullest degree, adding the potential to use them against Western targets. With multiple capabilities in their arsenals, China and Russia both pose major threats to the U.S. and allied nations from a government sponsored, and likely encourage criminal activity. So, as we conclude, as we wrap all this up, information warfare is a powerful strategic concept comprised of four primary operational information related capabilities: cyber operations, electromagnetic warfare, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and information operations. Although a great deal of research has been conducted regarding the effects of cyber operations on critical infrastructure, the other information related capabilities within the greater information warfare framework pose critical threats to critical infrastructure. Electromagnetic warfare threatens the communications, navigation, radar, and data link systems of thousands of critical infrastructure organizations and nodes. Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance poses a risk as information gathered from associated information systems and networks reveal vulnerabilities that can be exploited readily by adversaries at multiple levels. Numerous forms of information operations can be used to gather information, erode trust, and psychologically degrade critical infrastructure operators and technicians Undergirding all of these is cyber operations, which provides the critical capabilities to drive, guide, and secure information through all of these systems. Adversaries such as China and Russia have already demonstrated the capability to overrun these systems using information warfare against local and regional populations and permit their criminal networks to enact ransomware, malware, and many other operations against critical infrastructure and other infrastructures across the globe. While information warfare combined information related capabilities have not been used to their fullest potential within critical infrastructure yet, the likelihood of them being used soon by adversarial governments or their adherents is high. Only through analyzing the threat environment more deeply and securing not only cyber vulnerabilities, but other information warfare areas will these threats be mitigated. So thank you so much for listening in to this talk today and being with me. I hope that it's been helpful to you. I hope that maybe you'll see how the areas, of course, of cyber operations, they already have been a key to many critical infrastructure attacks through ransomware and in other ways. But electromagnetic warfare, very high uh, uh, capabilities there to take down communications and also navigation and other means that are used in critical infrastructure. Intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, gathering information about critical infrastructure systems, et cetera, and information operations, trying to cause doubt or throw, sabotage public trust in these systems. And I thank you again. I thank IARIA. Thank you for all of the attendees. Really glad to be here and grateful for being involved with the IARIA the last 2 years. I wish you all the best and hope you have a great conference and be safe. Thank you again so much.